Hello, everyone. My name is Blake Serrano, and this is my BS Life podcast. I want to start off by saying that I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. The girl that cuts my hair, she's always like, dude, you need to start a podcast. You've lived a very interesting life, and every time I talk to you, you've got some crazy shit going on. So, like most things in my life, I'm just kind of jumping off the cliff and kind of building the plane on the way down. So, thanks for joining. Let's go. I was born in 1984 in New Orleans, Louisiana. When I came home from the hospital that day, I came home to a single mother and a single grandmother. I never knew my father. My mom never knew her father. My grandma never knew her father. So I do feel that that's a little bit relevant part of my story. By about the age of 9, I wound up moving to a very small town in Texas called Kilgore, Texas, which had and still has around 11,000, 12,000 citizens in that town. If you can imagine, the big to do there is the one big Walmart. I don't know if it's still there. That was kind of like the one big thing. I think we had a Mexican restaurant we would go. The population is probably like 85% white people, like Texas white people, and then some Hispanic people in there to do the work, but not a whole lot of black people, not a lot of diversity. Shout out to my people at Kilgore, Texas. Anyways, so I went to a real small school in Kilgore. It was this little church school, which in hindsight was really like a homeschool sort of program. And they just put a bunch of kids, different ages, in a room, and we really self taught ourselves. And so I like to talk about that because I really think that helped sort of blossom me into who I am today. This move from New Orleans to Kilgore at around the age of 10 was my first experience of a real culture shock. You know, I went from a very Hispanic sort of upbringing with this Cuban, spoke Spanish and aunts and cousins and stuff, to this like real country church Christian conservative sort of upbringing. And it was cool. I got nothing bad to say about it, but it was a real cultural shift. And so at a very young age, I really learned how to deal with that, how to adapt, how to fit in. So about 3 years after living in Kilgore, Texas, I moved to Honolulu, Hawaii. So I went from like a cultural shock going from New Orleans to Texas, and then I went from Texas, which wasn't very diverse at the area I was in, to Honolulu, Hawaii, which is incredibly diverse, especially to us Howleys in the mainland. So the first most obvious question I always get is, were you in the military? Were your parents in the military? We were not in the military. No one in my family. Well, I did have an uncle in the military, but my mom was not in the military, and I didn't know my father. Maybe he was in the military. I don't know. But anyways, my upbringing, my family was about as opposite as the military as you could get. My mom really just liked to move. We had a she was married to one of my stepfathers at the time, and he was this computer guy, and he was actually able to work remotely in the 90s. So one day he came home from prison, and we'll get into that later. And he just told my mom, like, if you could move anywhere in the world, where would you go? And she was like, oh, I want to go to Hawaii, probably thinking whatever. And a couple of months later, yeah, here we were in Hawaii. So I was in the middle of seventh grade, literally in the middle of seventh grade. I went from a population of 11,000, mostly white, conservative country folk, to Honolulu, Hawaii, which is predominantly an Asian culture, a lot of Polynesians in there. And so I was really a minority there. Lucky for me, I had a little bit experience already with culture shock, and so I really knew how to fit in and adapt. But this was a lot different for me. Seventh grade, eighth grade, I really started embracing the fact that I was different than everybody else. I had a lot of different experiences, a lot of different knowledge. And that's when I really started learning that most people always live, where they were born. And a lot of how they view things are based on that upbringing. And so the fact that I kind of moved around and got to see a lot of different cultures at such a young age, I didn't really ever stay grounded to one sort of mentality. I was always open to adapting and trying out different things, and even seeing something from their perspective and going like, well, over here they look at it differently, and then able to sort of make my own choices. So my stepfather at the time, his name was Jim, and Jim wasn't a great stepfather. He wasn't a terrible stepfather. He just kind of filled the space in the apartment, if you will. But he was a computer guy, and he always had a computer or two around, and he always had computer books, and he always had computer magazines and stuff. And while he didn't really like teach me any of that, I did have those resources available to me, and I've always been into computers and really curious. So I started messing around with computers and reading computer books and reading computer magazines. Probably in like sixth, seventh grade, I really got into it. And around this time, the internet started coming out too. So it was kind of this perfect storm of my curiosity, also having the resources, and then the technology starting to grow. So it was either seventh grade or eighth grade. So I went to this small little church school in Hawaii. Uh, I grew up very religious, I guess Baptist, Christian, if you will. So I went to this small church school in Hawaii, and I believe it was our eighth grade year, and we got computers in a computer lab, and we got the internet for the first time. So honestly, in hindsight, this is probably the only time that I was ever happy and excited about school. I was really excited that we got all these new computers, that we got the internet, because I loved it. On the weekends, I would take the bus to like CompUSA and Office Depot or the library to use their computers. I would take the bus all over town. That's one of the best things about Hawaii is they have excellent public transportation. I mean, the whole island's like 30 miles or something ridiculous. So it's not difficult to get from point A to point B. So I used to ride the bus and I'd carry my little composition book and I would literally like write code, HTML code, JavaScript code in my little notebook. And I had like floppy disks, hard drive disks, and I would just carry them around. And whenever I could get to a computer, I'd stick my disk in there, open my composition book, put my little code in Notepad, render it in the browser, close it, get back on the bus, write my little code again. So again, in hindsight, it was pretty obvious that I was a computer guy, but no one around me besides my stepfather was a computer guy. Even the school, when they got them, I quickly realized that I knew way more than everybody else about these computers. And that's really what started me no longer caring about school. And that's also what started me realizing that I was a lot smarter than most people, at least when it came to computers. And I really just always had this gut instinct that computers were the future. So in eighth grade, I started skipping school. And I wasn't skipping school to go smoke weed and stuff with my buddies. Usually it was to go to the library to read books and study and work on my little website. The show South Park had just come out back then, and I remember I had a blog and like an email list about South Park, and there was a animation tool called Adobe Flash. I don't even think it was Adobe back then. It was called like Shockwave or something, but it was the early versions of Flash, and I was learning how to use that. I really knew how to like hack software. I would go to Office Max and purchase software and then sort of rip it onto my computer and get the serial number. I figured all these things out at a pretty young age. So even though I didn't have a ton of resources available, I was able to use the technology to get more resources. So as I started gaining this confidence and this knowledge, people around me didn't really understand computers and the internet, and so they weren't that into it. And everyone wanted me to study school stuff. Now let's fast forward to about the age of 16. My mother and I and my new stepdad, John, moved to West Palm Beach, Florida. In Florida, it was either 15 or 16 years old was the youngest that you were able to drop out of high school, but your parents had to sign you out in order for you to do that. This was where I made one of my first big deals in life, and big shout out to my mom for this one. Basically, she was like, I'll sign you out of school, but you have to go to GED school and get your GED. Not just do you have to go to GED school, but she like drove me there. I had my own car and I even had my own little business and I was working and stuff by that point. But she drove me to GED school and I got my GED. This was another sort of aha moment. At the age of 15 or 16, I got my GED in Florida, and I was one of the youngest people to ever pass the test. And I also had one of the highest scores ever on the test at the time. The state of Florida actually gave me a $5,000 scholarship to go to college. This was another one of those moments where I started realizing everyone around me was telling me how important high school was and how much I would regret dropping out. But the state was giving me money because of how smart I was. So it was a very strange time in my life. Now let's fast forward one more time. Now it's 2009 and I'm in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm about to graduate college with a bachelor degree in computer science. Shocker. At this point, I went on to join corporate America as a junior software engineer, and the next 10 to 12 years were pretty darn boring. Not a whole lot to report there. But then in 2020, COVID happened, and this is where the fun part of the story really begins. I think we're going to end this episode for now so I can edit this and really figure out what I'm doing. I need to get it online and see if I can get some people to actually pay attention. But I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to this little bit summary of my upbringing and my story. The plan in this podcast is to dig deeper into more of these topics and see what people want to hear. So thanks again for listening. My BS Life podcast. See you soon.